At 1:15 in the morning on a cold Thursday in late September, I was loading the last of my gear into the bed of my pickup truck when my neighbor Pete called. I had been looking forward to this trip for 3 weeks. 4 hours north to Lake Erie with my buddies from Station 14, the same crew I'd run with for the better part of 3 decades before I hung up my turnout gear for good. We had a cabin rented outside Marblehead, 2 boats reserved at the marina, and I hadn't slept worth a damn in anticipation. My wife Lois had kissed me goodnight at 10 and told me to be careful on the road. I'd told her I always was. We'd been saying versions of that to each other for 32 years, and neither of us had ever quite believed it. But it was one of those small lies that a long marriage accumulates like pocket change, harmless, familiar, somehow necessary. I answered on the second ring. Pete had lived across the street for 11 years. He was 68 years old, a retired postal worker, who kept a ring camera on his front porch because his wife had been nervous about car break-ins on the block 2 summers back. He did not call late unless something was wrong. He had never called this late. His voice was tight when it came through. The kind of tight that men impose on themselves when they want to stay calm and are not quite managing it. "Jack," he said, "is Lois home?" "She's asleep." "What happened, Pete?" "I heard her," he said, "about 15 minutes ago. She screamed 2-3 times, and then something broke, something heavy, and it went quiet. Jack, I already called 911. You need to come home, right now." My tackle bag hit the driveway before I was fully through the decision to drop it. I don't have complete memory of the drive back. What I remember is the feel of the steering wheel and the way the streetlights on Route 161 strobed across the windshield in a rhythm that had no business being so ordinary when what was waiting for me was not ordinary at all. I know I made it from the edge of town to Maple Run Court in 7 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I turned onto my street, and the math was not possible with the speed limit being what it was. There were 3 Westerville Police Department cruisers in front of my house, an ambulance at the curb with its rear doors open, and my son was standing on the front porch. It means everything to me that you chose to spend your time here today. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your city, your state. I read every single one here at Molten Vengeance. And I want you to know up front, some details of this story have been adjusted to protect privacy. But the shape of what my son did, and how my wife and I found our way through it, that is as close to the truth as I know how to tell. My name is Jack Calloway. I am 64 years old. I spent 38 years with the Columbus Fire Department, starting as a probationary firefighter at Station 7 in 1986 and finishing as a battalion chief. In those 38 years, I walked into structures that were actively failing around me. I learned to read smoke and heat, and the particular sound a wall makes when the load it's carrying has finally exceeded what it was built to bear. I know what it feels like to move towards something that every instinct is telling everyone else to run from. I thought that experience had prepared me for most things life could put in front of a man. I was wrong about that. Lois and I had lived on Maple Run Court in Westerville, Ohio, since 1992. We bought the house 3 years after our wedding with a down payment we'd saved, while living in an apartment the size of a generous closet. 2 bedrooms that year, 3 the next, a backyard that took me 2 Saturdays to figure out how to mow. There was a dogwood tree in the rear corner that Lois had planted the spring our son was born. I had watched that tree grow up alongside him for 36 years. Our son's name is Dean. He had grown into a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with his mother's dark eyes, and a version of my stubbornness that I had come to understand was more dangerous than my own. He had a salesman's instinct for reading what a room wanted to hear, and he had built a small property management company in Columbus that did well for several years, then less well, and then considerably worse. I had not understood how much worse until that night. When I turned onto my street and saw the lights, I pulled over and ran the rest of the way on foot. A young officer stepped directly into my path at the front walk. "Sir, stop right there." "That's my house," I said. "My wife is in there. Where is Lois?" He spoke into his radio and then looked at me with an expression that knocked the air straight out of my chest. "Your wife has been transported to Riverside Methodist Hospital. She was conscious when the paramedics arrived. Sir, what's your name?" "Jack Calloway. I live here. Where is my wife? Is she all right?" A second man was already walking toward me from the porch, plain clothes, mid-40s, a notepad in his hand, and nothing in his expression that suggested he was there to offer comfort. He introduced himself as Detective Waverly, Westerville PD. Mr. Calloway, thank you for coming back quickly. I need a few minutes with you before you go anywhere. Behind him, just inside the yellow perimeter tape, my son was standing on the porch. Dean's eyes were red at the rims. His shoulders were pulled forward in a posture of grief that I would have believed completely 6 months earlier. In 38 years of firefighting, I learned the difference between a real fire and a set one. Real fires have a smell. Set fires are clean at the edges in ways that nature never is. I looked at my son's face and felt something go very cold and very certain in the center of my chest. Dad, he said. His voice broke on the word at exactly the right place. I didn't want it to come to this. Detective Waverly asked where I had been between 9 in the evening and 1 in the morning. I told him, home, then loading my truck, heading north for a fishing trip with friends. I mentioned Pete's call. I offered my phone to confirm the timestamp. He wrote it down. He asked whether anyone could confirm my presence inside the house before I left. Before I could answer, Dean came down off the porch. His voice dropped into the careful, weighted register of a man who wants to sound like he is reluctantly handing over a truth he has been protecting for too long. Detective, he said, my father has not been himself. For months. My mother called me 2 weeks ago, crying. She told me she was scared of him in their own house. A pause. 2 fingers pressed to the bridge of his nose. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't keep quiet after tonight. I stood very still. In 38 years of firefighting, I learned that the most dangerous moment on any scene is not the moment of visible crisis. It is the quiet moment just before the secondary collapse, when everything looks like it might hold, and then it doesn't. I was standing in exactly that moment. Mr. Calloway, Waverly said, your son has indicated ongoing concerns about your behavior at home. I want to give you the opportunity to respond before we continue. My son, I said, keeping my voice as level as I was capable of, has not once come to me directly with a concern about my behavior. In the past 6 months, he has, however, asked me on 4 separate occasions about the deed to this property. I looked at Dean briefly and then back at the detective. I thought nothing of it at the time. I am thinking considerably more of it right now. Something moved across Dean's face, a fraction of a second, a hairline crack in the surface, and then it closed. Dad, please. His voice fell into something that sounded devastated. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. I'm trying to protect Mom. That's all I have ever been trying to do. The word protect landed in my stomach like a stone. I allowed Waverly to guide me to a cruiser, not because I was beaten. I was not beaten, but because I understood the way you understand things after the adrenaline clears and what remains is just the facts of a burning building, that whatever Dean had constructed tonight had not yet finished falling, and I had spent my entire career knowing that the only way through a dangerous structure is one careful step at a time, with your eyes fully open. The interrogation room at Westerville PD was smaller and colder than I expected. Detective Waverly brought me coffee and placed a manila folder on the table between us without ceremony. Inside was a typed document, formatted, dated, structured, not the rough shorthand of a worried son's private notes, but something built to look official. It covered 7 months. It described specific dates and times. An incident in April when I had allegedly thrown a plate across the kitchen. A night in June when I had supposedly locked Lois out of the bedroom for 2 hours. A pattern of escalating verbal aggression and erratic decision-making that would have convinced any reasonable person if it bore any relationship to events that had actually occurred. None of it had happened. I pressed my palms flat on the table and breathed through my nose. Slowly, the way I had learned to breathe in burning buildings, when everything in my body was telling me to do the opposite. Because I understood with absolute clarity that the moment I lost my composure in this room was the precise moment that document started to look like the truth. Detective Waverly, I said, I'd like you to look at that document very carefully. Look at the formatting. Look at how consistent the language is throughout 7 months. Ask yourself whether this reads like notes a worried son kept on his phone, or like something that took considerable time and deliberate intention to prepare. Waverly looked at me for a long time, without writing anything down. At 4:19 in the morning, he told me I was free to go. Insufficient evidence. I could collect my belongings from the front desk. I walked out into the dark Ohio night and stood on the sidewalk, with my hand pressed hard against my sternum, feeling something too large and too tangled to name. Not relief. Something more like standing at the edge of a collapse site in the first gray light of morning, understanding that the work ahead of you is larger than you initially assessed. I called Pete, then I called my old friend Bruce. Lois was in room 318 at Riverside Methodist. The nurse, a steady woman named Ms. Carver, who had been with her since she'd been admitted, told me that Lois had a bruised shoulder and a laceration on her forearm, where she had caught herself on the corner of the hallway table when she fell. She said it quietly and then said the rest of it. That Dean had grabbed her arm, that Lois had pulled away and gone sideways into the table, that she had documented the mechanism of injury in the patient's chart, and had filed a report with the hospital's patient advocacy team and was required under Ohio's elder abuse reporting statutes to do so. I thanked her in a voice I did not entirely trust. Lois was somewhere between sleep and waking when I came through the door, and the way she flinched when she saw me, just that single involuntary pulling back, the body's reaction before the mind catches up, hit me in a place that still has not fully stopped hurting. I know that Dean had been working on her for months, planting exactly that reaction so that when the time came, her fear would be a performance he could point to. Understanding it did not make it hurt less. "Lois," I said, "it's me, it's Jack." She blinked, and then recognition came through, the way ventilation works through a smoke-filled room. Slowly, and then all at once, she burst into tears. I crossed the room and took her hand. She held on so hard her fingers trembled. "It was Dean," she said. "He came at 9:30. He said he needed to talk. He went straight to the study, Jack. He went straight to the filing cabinet." "What was he looking for?" "The deed, the trust documents, all the paperwork from your father's estate." She pressed her eyes shut. "I told him to stop. I told him to leave. He said I didn't understand what he was trying to do. He said he was protecting us." A tear ran down her cheek, and then he grabbed my arm, and She stopped. I waited. "I told him we were both his parents," she said finally, "and he did this to both of us. Before I tell you what Pete's camera showed, and what my friend Bruce uncovered when he started pulling on that thread, I want you to do something for me. If this story is reaching you, drop the number 14 in the comments right now. That was my station. Let me know you're still here." Pete's Ring camera had clear coverage of the full width of Maple Run Court in both directions. He had the footage pulled up on his laptop when I knocked on his door the next morning. He turned the screen toward me without saying a word. The timestamp read 1:22 a.m. My front door opened. Dean came out carrying a canvas bag, the large one Lois kept in the hall closet, filled enough that he adjusted the shoulder strap twice coming down the steps. He moved quickly down the front walk, turned left, and did not look back once. 20 seconds later, a dark SUV that had been sitting with its lights off 2 houses down the block pulled slowly away from the curb and followed him. "That vehicle was parked there from 9:47 p.m., Pete said, 2 hours and 35 minutes before Dean came out of the house. He had already made 3 copies of the footage. He handed me a USB drive carefully, with both hands, the way you hand someone something that matters. My phone buzzed, unknown number, a text message. "Mr. Calloway, my name is Gwen. I think we need to talk. Please don't say anything to Dean." Gwen was my son's wife. I had known her for 4 years, the length of their marriage. She was 33, quiet in the particular way of someone who has learned that quietness feels safer. We had shared 3 Thanksgiving tables. I had always attributed her reserve to shyness. Sitting across from me in the corner booth of a diner on Sunbury Road, she did not look shy. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something very heavy and had finally made a decision about it. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. She checked the door every 30 seconds. "I found something 3 weeks ago," she said, "in the pocket of his coat when I was doing laundry." She unfolded a piece of notepaper and smoothed it flat on the table. Dean's handwriting, fast, slanted, pressing hard. A name, a phone number with a Nashville area code, and 3 words below, "off-market, cash close." "I looked him up," Gwen said. "He's a real estate investor. Distressed property acquisitions, fast closings, no MLS listing, no title questions asked. She finally picked up her cup, realized her hands were shaking too badly, and set it down. I've been listening at the office door for 2 months. I've heard pieces, things about the timeline and the signature clearing. I didn't understand what it all meant. She looked at me. I think I didn't want to understand. I asked her how much he owed. She exhaled. There's a letter in his desk from a private lending company in Tennessee. The tone is not friendly. It mentions consequences and a deadline. She paused. The number at the top is over $400,000. I looked at Dean's handwriting on that piece of paper. Those 3 words, pressed into the paper so hard the pen had almost gone through. And I thought about how long it takes to accumulate $400,000 in debt while calling your parents every Sunday to ask how they were feeling. Thank you, I told her. Go home. Act normally. Don't mention we spoke, and if anything else comes to you, call me directly. She nodded and stood up with the effort of someone lifting more than their own body's weight. She walked out into the Ohio morning, and I sat in that booth a moment longer understanding that she had come to me not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing. Those 2 things are rarely the same, and when they are, the person who chooses right anyway deserves to be seen clearly. Bruce Hennessy had spent 30 years as a licensed insurance fraud investigator before his knees gave him a reason to retire. He lived in Dublin now, ran 4 monitors in his home office, and had more energy than most people half his age. We had been friends since our kids were in the same Little League division. He answered on the first ring. He called me back 48 hours later. The investor in Nashville had exchanged 29 text messages and 6 calls with Dean over the previous 2 months. He had a preliminary valuation on the house at $385,000, 61 cents on the dollar of its actual market value. Dean needed cash fast and needed no questions asked. The Tennessee lender was a private company operating outside federal banking regulation. Dean had borrowed $415,000 from them 14 months ago, at a compounding interest rate that Bruce described, without any editorial emphasis, as not what any bank would charge. His outstanding balance was $438,000. Full repayment was required in 19 days. Then Bruce reached under his legal pad and placed a single printed page on the table between us. It was a home equity line of credit application, a HELOC, submitted to a Columbus area credit union 10 weeks prior. The collateral listed was our house on Maple Run Court, which Lois and I had paid off completely 9 years ago. The amount requested was $160,000. The application had been approved. The funds had been disbursed. The signature on the application was mine. I had never seen that document in my life. The signature is forged, Bruce said. He had compared it against 6 authenticated samples of my actual handwriting. The notary who stamped it authenticated a signature they did not witness. In Ohio, that's a criminal offense for the notary and for Dean. The $160,000 was deposited to an account in your name at a separate institution, moved out within 72 hours across 3 different banks, and ended up in an LLC registered in Tennessee with Dean listed as sole member. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. When money crosses state lines through the federal banking system as part of a scheme to defraud, Bruce said, that is wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343. Maximum sentence is 20 years per federal count. The room felt very still. He didn't just steal from us, I said. No, Bruce said. He built a structure. He built it, assuming no one who knew what to look for would ever think to look. He looked at me over his reading glasses. He forgot you know someone who spent 30 years knowing exactly where to look. I had things to show Lois. I didn't know how to begin. I sat with that for 2 days before I understood there is no gentle way to show someone the full dimensions of what has been done to them. There is only honest or not honest, and not honest was not something I was willing to offer her. She listened at the kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap, her face very still. She did not interrupt. She did not speak until I reached the last item. There's one more thing, I said. Bruce had obtained 6 months of Dean's outgoing email through legal channels. One email, sent on a Wednesday afternoon in late June, went to the admissions office of a residential memory care facility in Worthington, Ohio, the private, expensive kind. It read, I am writing to inquire about placement for an elderly female family member. She is 62, in good physical health, but exhibiting significant emotional instability and cognitive irregularities that make independent living a growing concern. I am her son and primary decision maker. Could you please provide information on your intake process and your protocols for managing patients who initially resist placement? Lois read it once. She read it again. Then she stood up and left the kitchen without a word. She was gone less than 2 minutes. When she came back, she was carrying a shoebox with a rubber band around it. She set it on the table between us and looked at it a moment before she looked at me. I need to show you something too, she said. Her voice was steadier than I had any right to expect. She removed the rubber band and lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of papers, some folded, some flat. She laid the first 3 in front of me, one at a time, and told me the story that came with each one. The first, Dean had told her it was an updated beneficiary designation for our homeowner's insurance policy. She'd signed it at this kitchen table, with him watching. It was a durable power of attorney granting Dean full legal authority to make financial decisions on her behalf in the event she was deemed incapacitated. The second, Dean had told her it was a routine bank form updating emergency contact information. It was an authorization granting Dean co-management access to her personal savings account. The third, Dean had said the homeowners association needed updated contact records. It was a notarized statement authorizing a property management consultation and referenced terms she never saw. Lois set her hands flat on top of the stack to keep it from sliding, and the steadiness in her face before she spoke was something I will carry for the rest of my life. He sat in that chair, she said, the chair where I was sitting. He put papers in front of me and told me what they were. He watched me sign, and when he left, her voice cracked clean through. He hugged me at the door, Jack. He told me he'd see me Sunday. I moved around the table and sat beside her. She pressed her face against my shoulder and cried in a way I had not heard from her since the year we lost her mother, deep, exhausted, from somewhere below the place where ordinary grief lives. I held her and did not tell her it was going to be all right. I had promised her truth this morning, and truth and comfort are not always the same thing. When her breathing finally slowed, she pulled back and looked at me with red eyes and the particular steadiness that has always been the thing I love most about her. What do we do? She said. We fight back, I told her, together. Drop 38 in the comments right now if you're still with us. 38, the years I put in before I retired. Let me know you're here. Paula Renwick had practiced elder law in Columbus for over 2 decades. She had the kind of stillness that comes not from being unmoved, but from having trained herself to receive devastating information at a pace that allows her to do something useful with it. She listened to everything we brought her, the camera footage, the forged HELOC, the email, the shoebox, without interrupting once. When we finished, she walked to the whiteboard. Ohio Revised Code, Section 291302, she said, writing as she spoke. Theft from an elderly person. Ohio defines elderly as 60 or older. Jack qualifies. Enhanced penalties, mandatory restitution. Lois's situation adds separate counts of forgery and fraud. She underlined it twice. Wire fraud, she continued. Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 1343. The moment that $160,000 crossed state lines through the federal banking system as part of a scheme to defraud, Dean entered federal jurisdiction. Maximum sentence of 20 years per count. She would file an emergency injunction with Franklin County Court of Common Pleas that afternoon. A temporary restraining order freezing all assets associated with our property and accounts. Any transaction Dean attempted in violation would be void on contact and constitute contempt of court. She looked at Lois directly, and her voice softened without losing any of its precision. The documents you signed, the power of attorney, the savings authorization. I am filing simultaneously to have those voided on grounds of fraud and undue influence. They were obtained through deception. Lois, you did not sign away anything that will hold. Lois closed her eyes for a moment and let out a breath she had been holding for 3 weeks. The injunction was filed by 2 that afternoon. The Nashville investor was contacted by Paula and fully cooperative within hours. The eager cooperation of a man who has just realized the transaction he thought was merely unconventional was something considerably worse. Dean found out about the freeze order the next morning. By 11 a.m., he had filed a petition in Franklin County Probate Court to have me declared mentally incompetent, and to have himself appointed conservator of my person and estate. By 11:15, Paula's filing had preceded his by 16 hours. I will not pretend the next 3 weeks were easy. They were not. But I will tell you that Judge Callahan, presiding in Franklin County Probate Court, was the kind of judge who reads everything placed before him and asks the questions that cut directly to what matters. He read the independent neuropsychological evaluation, ordered by the court itself, conducted by a board-certified specialist, which concluded without qualification that I demonstrated full cognitive capacity, sound judgment, and no clinical basis whatsoever for guardianship or conservatorship. He asked the examiner 2 questions. She answered both without hesitation. He read the forged HELOC documentation. He read the email to the memory care facility in Worthington. I watched his expression when he reached the phrase patients who initially resist placement. There was a small visible tightening around his eyes that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, but was the thing that exists in the space between them. He dismissed the conservatorship petition in its entirety and noted in the official record that the evidence presented suggested a pattern of conduct, by the petitioner warranting further legal scrutiny. He brought the gavel down. Lois's hand found mine on the bench before the sound had finished. Gwen called me that evening. "He's been on the phone until 2, 3 in the morning," she said. Her voice was quieter than usual, the quietness of someone who has made a decision and is living inside it. I heard him say something about a Nashville contact and needing another option. I think he knows it's falling apart. I think he's looking for a way out. I told her, if she was willing to do one more thing, we could make sure that option didn't exist. She said she was willing. The arrest team arrived at Dean and Gwen's house at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning in November. Detective Waverly was there, the same detective who'd questioned me in my own driveway 6 weeks earlier, alongside 2 agents from the FBI field office in Columbus. Gwen had called us 30 minutes before to confirm Dean was still inside, and had no idea what was coming. She had told him she needed to talk, that it was important, that she wanted to make breakfast together. She kept him at the kitchen table while 3 vehicles pulled quietly into the cul-de-sac. When the knock came, my son opened the door himself. Waverly told me later that the color left Dean's face, the way it leaves a face when the body has been dreading something for a very long time, and the dreaded thing has finally arrived. They read him his rights in his own front hallway: theft from an elderly person, forgery, 2 counts of wire fraud under federal statute. When the handcuffs went on, Dean looked past Waverly at the kitchen doorway where Gwen was standing. She looked back at him. She did not look away. She did not say anything, and then she walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the table and pressed both palms flat on the surface, the way Lois had done in Paula's office, feeling for something solid beneath her hands. She had done the right thing. She had looked at a moment that required courage, and she had not flinched from it. I did not want to pass over that without saying so, because the people who do the right thing in hard moments deserve to be seen clearly. Waverly called me when it was finished. I was in the backyard under the dogwood tree Lois had planted the spring Dean was born. The tree was old enough now that its canopy covered most of the rear corner of the yard. I had my coffee and the September light, and the particular silence of a Tuesday morning with nowhere to be. "It's done," he said. I sat there a long time after the call ended, not from shock, from the particular exhaustion that arrives when something has been holding itself together through pure will, and the will has finally been given permission to rest. Lois came out eventually. She read my face the way she has read it for 32 years. The way long attention to another person builds a kind of knowledge that words were never designed to carry, and she sat down beside me and rested her head on my shoulder. "Is it over?" she asked. "Almost," I said. "One more day." Dean stood before Judge Callahan in February and entered a guilty plea on all counts. The Ohio charges and both federal counts of wire fraud consolidated under a plea agreement. His attorney confirmed the plea in the flat, professional voice of a man doing his job without any illusions about the outcome. Judge Callahan looked at my son directly. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "do you understand that by entering this plea, you are waiving your right to trial by jury, your right to confront the witnesses against you, and your right against self-incrimination?" Dean's voice, when it came, was the smallest I had heard it since he was a boy standing in my kitchen, afraid to show me something he had broken. Yes, Your Honor. How do you plead? A pause, long enough that the room held its breath. Guilty. 7 years in the Ohio State prison system. Mandatory restitution of $160,000 to Lois and me. A permanent protective order. His remaining personal assets seized and liquidated to cover his Tennessee debt. The gavel came down. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because the honest thing is the only thing I know how to offer. It was not triumph. It was a quiet, deep settling, the way a fire feels after it is finally fully suppressed, and you are standing in the remains, checking the walls to make sure nothing is still smoldering. Dean was allowed a moment before the officers moved him. He turned toward the gallery and found my face. He held it. Whatever was in his eyes, and I have turned it over many times since that February morning, was not a performance. There was no audience left for performances. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who has finally run out of the stories he has been telling himself and is seeing, plainly, without any buffer, exactly what he did. I looked back at my son. I let him see whatever was in my face, which was not anger and was not triumph and was not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but was something real, something that had been there the night he was born and would be there until I was not. They turned him around and took him out of the courtroom. Lois's hand was already in mine. We sold the house on Maple Run Court in April. I had expected it to be hard. 32 years is a long time to live inside 4 walls, and I had built memories into those walls the way I had once built fire stations, carefully, with the intention that they would last. I expected grief of the complicated, layered kind that attaches itself to places the way it attaches to people. What I felt instead, standing in the driveway on the morning of closing, was something closer to release. Not because the memories were gone. They were not, and they would not be. The memory of teaching Dean to ride his bike on that sidewalk was still there. The memory of Lois humming in the kitchen on a Sunday morning with the coffee maker running was still there. 32 years of things worth carrying, and I carry them still. But the house had become something else alongside all of that. It had become the place where a man sat at my kitchen table and handed my wife papers and watched her sign her name and kissed her at the door before he left. Some structures hold too much of the wrong kind of weight. You recognize it and you set it down. You don't abandon what was built there. You carry it out with you. Pete helped us load the last of the boxes. He wrapped Lois's good china like it was his own. He is the kind of neighbor this world does not make enough of, and I told him so, and he told me to stop being sentimental, and we hugged in the driveway with the truck running. Gwen sent a handwritten letter to Paula's office because she didn't have our new address. She wrote that she had retained her own attorney and was proceeding with divorce. She wrote that she was sorry, not the reflexive kind that manages liability, but the specific kind that names exactly what it is sorry for and why. She wrote that she hoped we might come to think of her as someone who did one right thing when it mattered, even if she had spent too long before that moment looking the other way. Lois read the letter, folded it carefully, and handed it back to me. She did one right thing, Lois said. That counts for something. I put the letter in the box with the things worth keeping. We moved to Marblehead, Ohio. Small cottage, 2 bedrooms, a porch that faces Lake Erie. I had originally been heading there the night all of this started. That pre-dawn fishing trip that never happened. Some days I think there is something right about that, though I don't have words precise enough for what I mean by it. I sit on that porch most mornings with coffee that is actually still warm. The lake moves the way it has always moved. Enormous, indifferent, unchanged by anything that has happened to any particular family on its shore. The first few mornings I kept waiting for the weight to come back. It did not come back. In 38 years of firefighting, I came to understand one thing above everything else. The integrity of a structure is not proven by the absence of fire. It is proven by what remains standing after the fire has done everything it came to do. Lois and I are still here. We are sitting on a porch on Lake Erie with warm coffee and the sound of the water, and her voice comes through the kitchen window when she is on the phone with her sister, and all of it, every ordinary, unspectacular piece of it, is ours. It has always been ours. Some things cannot be taken. That is the only lesson I know how to offer, and I offer it as a man who learned it the way things stay learned, the hard way, all the way through. If there is someone in your life who is aging, who trusts the people around them without checking the fine print, who signs what is put in front of them because love has always been enough reason to sign, please go to them. Today, ask the hard questions. Sit with them long enough that they know you are there not to manage them but to stand beside them. Because I promise you, the hard questions are a great deal easier than the alternative. From Lois and me to wherever you are watching from, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. I hope you never need what I learned inside this story. And if you do, I hope you remember. What you have built across a lifetime of honest living is stronger than anything that comes for it. God bless you all.